Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the BSA R12, and in this one we're going to be making the moderator. So this will be part 2 in our shroud and moderator video series, and to start off with we're making the end cap for the moderator. Now I make my moderators in 3 pieces. We have the back cap and core, then we have the outer tube, whether that be carbon fibre or aluminium, and then finally we cap that off using an end cap. This particular moderator is going to be slightly different, as we are going to be boring out the back of the moderator so that it screws on over the shroud. Don't worry, you'll see exactly what I mean as we walk through the build, but the part we're starting off with is the end cap. To begin with, we're turning the OD down to just over 30mm, and then turning the very end of the end cap down to 15mm. The end cap itself will screw directly onto the core, so we need to thread this with a female M12x1 thread. But to begin with, we're just turning out the rough profile of the piece, and once that's done we can come back through with a centre drill and drill out the centre of the piece to 4mm, and this will just act as a pilot for the larger drills. Once we have that done, we can move over to an 11mm drill and drill the piece out. Finishing out the thread by putting on a nice chamfer, then coming back through with a tap and tapping the piece out. And then finally, the last thing we can do is part the piece off. We're making the end cap first, as we are going to be cutting male threads on the core itself, so we'll need to test fit the end cap to make sure everything fits correctly. With that done, we can move on to the body of the moderator. So this will house both the back cap and the core. And to begin with, we've just got some 32mm stock chucked up in the lathe, and we're facing the end. With that done, we can come back through with a centre drill, then drill the middle out to 8mm, which will act as a pilot for a 13mm drill. We're not drilling all the way through the piece at this stage, we're just drilling about 50mm deep. This will be the back side of the moderator, and this side is the side we're going to recess over the shroud itself. So drilling out to 13mm, then coming back with a boring bar and opening this up to 24.25mm. The shroud is 24mm in diameter, so the extra clearance will just give us a bit of room around the piece, and that just ensures that the moderator won't be touching the outside of the shroud. But we're just coming through with the boring bar, taking nice shallow passes, making sure that the chips don't pack up on the side of the boring bar. Once we're at our correct dimension, we can come back through with the boring bar and just put a nice face on the internal feature. This is the face that will screw directly onto the shroud, so it needs to be a good reference face so that nothing goes wrong when we screw the shroud onto the moderator. Along with that, we are also cutting a little undercut at the very end of the piece, so that the moderator screws all the way onto the shroud without contacting in the corners. The tool itself will have a slight corner radius, and we don't want the corner radius to cause us any problems. With that done, we can come back through with an 8mm end mill and just create a nice round hole in the bottom of the piece. This will just ensure that our pilot drill is nice and on centre. But after that's done, we can come back through with an 11.5mm drill bit, and that's tapping size for 1/2 inch UNF. So we'll get that drilled out, then tap the piece 1/2 inch UNF. The last thing we can do in this setup is test fit the shroud and the mandrel. So I've got the end cap for the shroud screws onto a nice long mandrel, and we're screwing that on and watching the very end of the mandrel for any noticeable run out. And as you can see there, it's spinning fairly true. Next, we can mount a male 1/2 inch UNF mandrel into the lathe and screw on our moderator. We'll be screwing it on nice and tight by hand, then finishing it off with some parrot grips. With that done, we can centre drill the end, mount a centre, then start work on the OD. Rough turning the piece down to 30mm, then coming back through and back turning the very end down to 30mm dead. Next up, we can start roughing out some of the features. The first thing we're going to do is rough out the very end, and this will be the end that we screw our end cap on. For now though, we're just marking out where we need to turn to, then we can turn the OD of the piece down to 28mm for a good fit in our carbon fibre tube. We're going to be using 30mm OD carbon, and the ID will be 28mm. Now as we get towards the back of the piece, you can see me using the end of a toothbrush just to stop the piece from ringing. This end of the moderator is the end we bored out, and as we get to this part, it does start to ring as the end is hollow. So we're just using the end of a toothbrush for a little bit of dampening. Next thing to do was to drill through the moderator. So first I used a 4.5mm pilot drill, drilling as far as I could. Then I come back through with my extra long 5mm drill bit and finished out the hole. Now when using these super long drill bits, it's very important to go nice and slow and use plenty of lubricant to keep everything moving. If the drill starts to bind, what can happen is the hole can be thrown off center and the hole won't be through the middle of the moderator. So we're just taking it nice and slow using lots of WD-40. After that we can come back through with an 8mm drill bit and drill out the last baffle chamber. This will be about 20mm deep. The next thing we can do is finish out the end of the moderator. So to begin with, we're recutting our center, then remounting our tailstock support, and then turning the end down to 15mm. This will be the part that our end cap screws onto, so we need a 15mm shoulder, then we need to turn the end down to 12mm for our M12x1 thread. So we're just taking it down nice and slowly, getting a nice finish on all the dimensions. Once we've got the dimensions where they need to be, we can put a undercut in for the thread, then start cutting the thread. As always, we're going to be using a fork form insert, and the insert itself cuts both the root and the crest of the threads, and it does a real nice job of threading. Using an insert like this, you get a nice clean thread profile and a nice clean finish. So just taking the thread down nice and slowly until we creep up on our desired dimension, and once we're near we can test fit the end cap, then put a final finishing pass across it. The next thing we can do is come back through with a 45-degree chamfer tool and put a soft start to the threads, just turning off the first 2 or 3 threads on the male piece. This will do 2 things. So number 1, it will make the end cap screw on very nicely, and number 2, it will make sure that the end cap doesn't bottom out on the male threads. What we want is the end cap to screw directly up to the shoulder so that it butts up against the shoulder rather than terminating against the threads. But then once we're happy, we can test fit the end cap on the very end, screwing it on, making sure it screws up nicely to the shoulder, and then we can turn the lathe on and spin it up. We're looking for any undue run out at this point, and as you can see there, it's running fairly true, so that's good enough. We have to finish all the features anyway, so a little bit of run out isn't critical. Next thing we can do is cut out the baffle chambers. So we're going to be using a part-off tool just to remove some of the material, creating a nice set of chambers, and these chambers will allow us to wrap a little bit of felt around the moderator itself. The felt we're going to be using is 3mm thick, so we need 6mm removed off the OD. In total there's going to be 5 baffle chambers, which includes the very first one, which we've already cut. So coming through with a part-off tool first, roughing out the material, then coming back through with the lathe tool and finishing out the faces, just putting a nice finish on everything. To start off with, we've got the tool held in the tool post normally. Then to get the back side of the baffles, we're just turning the tool round and positioning it so that we can cut the back sides of the baffles. The baffles themselves are going to be 2mm thick, and when all's said and done, the felt itself should be held nice and captive between the baffles, and the felt will just provide a little bit of extra sound suppression. The air will have to go through the felt before it can hit the carbon fibre tube, and that should just remove a little bit of the pop from the rifle. Next up we can cut the undercut for the mesh. So we're going to be using some metal mesh at the back of the moderator just to create a decorative finish. The idea is that we're going to be putting a carbon fibre tube over this, so we're going to be milling some slots in the carbon fibre tube so that you can see a little bit of stainless steel mesh through the slots. So this little undercut here will just capture the mesh nicely, stop it from moving up and down the moderator, and hopefully when all's said and done it should look quite nice. The mesh itself doesn't really serve any purpose other than decorative, and if we don't like it at the very end, we can always just cut another piece of carbon fibre tube and remove the slots entirely. The last thing we can do is cut 2 O-ring grooves to suit 24x2 O-rings, so that's 24mm ID, 2mm cross section. These O-rings will just make installing and removing the carbon fibre tube a little nicer, and in theory at least they should help insulate the carbon fibre tube from the aluminium. With them cut, we can test fit the carbon fibre tube and make sure it slides over there nicely, which it does. The next thing we can do is finish out the end cap. So first off, we're using a centre drill to create a centre mark in the end, then coming back through with our tailstock support. With that mounted, we can turn the OD down to 30mm, which will match the carbon fibre tube and also the other side of the moderator. With that done, we can flip our lathe tool round and start work on the backside features. We need to turn this down to just under 28mm, which will be a clearance fit in the carbon fibre tube. To finish the piece out with a 5.5mm drill bit and just get that drilled out. And then finally just deburring all the sharp corners. The last thing we can do in the lathe is turn the angle on the back side of the moderator. So to do this, we've got the compound slide set to 9 degrees, and we're just carefully turning the back side of the mod down until we reach the mark that you can see just in the very end of the moderator. We're taking nice shallow passes, as this side of the mod isn't really supported by anything, so just nice shallow passes to ensure that we get a nice finish and that we don't come into any chattering problems. And with that done, that's pretty much all the lathe work, so now we can move over to the mill and start work on the milled features. The next thing we can do is start work on the baffle chambers. So we've got the moderator moved over to the mill, and we've got the body of the moderator held in our vise. To begin with, we're coming through with an 8mm drill bit and just pilot drilling all of the baffle chambers. This will just make the end mill's job a little easier, as typically speaking, end mills don't like to be plunged straight through raw material. So getting all of the chambers drilled out first, then coming through with an end mill and plunging out most of the material. We're plunging to within about 0.5mm of the final wall dimensions, and once we've got most of the waste material removed, we can come back through and mill the side walls, taking the cuts in a few passes just so we don't get any chatter on the walls and that we get a nice finish on everything. The end mill itself is a 3-flute 8mm end mill, and we're just using a nice amount of WD-40 as cutting oil, blowing out the chips after each pass. The chambers themselves are all different sizes, and I find varying the chamber size just helps quieten the moderator down a little. It sort of changes the note of the moderator. So we're just doing one for the camera, and I'll do the rest off camera. If I'm honest, the camera is a little in the way when I do stuff like this, so we're just doing the one for the camera today. The next thing we can do is finish out the end cap. So I did do a little work on this off camera. As you can see there, I've put a decorative counterbore in the face and then chamfer at the very end. If I'm honest, I just forgot to press record on the camera, but you can see how I done that, and we've got a fair amount of lathe work in this video already, so you didn't really miss anything. The next thing we're going to be doing, however, is milling the decorative features around the very end of the part. So we're going to be doing 8 features using a 3mm ball end mill to create these little pockets in the end. These will just give us a little bit of grip when we want to unscrew the end of the moderator and also make a nice little decorative feature. So I've got my end mill depth set, and we're just coming through and milling each of the features one by one, rotating the part 45 degrees in between each piece. So from this side it looks like this, just coming in with the end mill and milling out the material. And on this side of the spindexer you can see that it's currently set to 180 degrees. We need to spin it round to 225. To do that, we move the location to 22 and then put the pin in position number 5. This accurately rotates the part 45 degrees and allows us to mill the next feature. The numbers on the wheel reference the larger number, so in this case 220, and then the pin location references the final degree marking. So we have it in position number 5. This references 225 degrees. You have 0 through 9, and that allows you to get each individual degree position on a 360 degree rotation. The last thing we can do is mill the slots in the carbon fibre tube. So to do this, we're using a nice sharp 3mm end mill and taking the slots in 2 passes. The first pass is just below the surface of the carbon fibre, and it helps to create a nice clean finish. I found if I took the pass in one shot, what would happen is that some of the carbon fibre would break up and create a rough finish on the sides of the car. So taking it in 2 passes just helped alleviate that, and the final result I think is pretty good. So to cut the slots, we've got the carbon fibre set up in our spindexer, and we're cutting 8 slots around the perimeter. and we're using the spindexer to index the part 45 degrees at a time. That gives us our nice even spacing. And this was a fairly interesting experiment. I haven't done horizontal cuts like this in carbon fibre before, but I'm happy to say it turned out fairly nicely. Carbon fibre on its own can look a little plain, so having some decorative slots in there with a little bit of stainless steel mesh behind them should make the shroud look a little different. But with that all said, what I'll do now is take you over to the bench and we'll see the final product. With that all said and done, that's pretty much the moderator and the shroud complete. They're not 100% finished yet. I still do have to anodise the moderator and the shroud end cap, but I just didn't have time this week. But I'll get you a good look at those once they're 100% finished when we do our final overview video of the BSA R12. For now though, I'll just get you a good look at both the shroud and the moderator. And first off, you can see the mesh in the end cap for the shroud there. It does really work quite well, if I'm honest. I am happy with how that's come out. I think it looks quite nice. And once we actually anodise the moderator, I'm sure the front end will pop a little more as well. The only thing I might do is look for some finer stainless steel mesh, as this stuff at the moment is a little heavy duty. The shroud and mod combo are overall 40 centimeters in length. The original BSA shroud and moderator is 45, so our new one is 50mm shorter and a little bit quieter than the original one. As always, the camera microphone really doesn't do these things justice. It sort of auto levels all the volume, so everything sort of sounds roughly the same. But I'll get you some dry files and hopefully you're going to be able to tell how quiet it is. So I'll get this taken off and we'll swap the original one back on. And I'll just do some shots with the original one. And hopefully from that you can tell the difference between the two shrouds. Now again, the camera really doesn't do it justice. In real life you can tell the difference straight away. And because of the way that the shroud and the baffles are set up in the moderator, with a pellet in there it does get even quieter. We have an active working shroud now, along with some back venting in the back here. So air is able to travel through the shroud and escape around the back here. The original shroud on the R12 is just a dummy shroud, so it doesn't actually work, but our new one works quite well. With that done, the last thing I'll show you is just the internal view, so we'll take the end cap off by just unscrewing it. We can then gently pull the carbon fibre tube off, being nice and careful not to lose our stainless steel mesh, so I'll put that safely over to one side. So I'll just get you a good look at the moderator core. As you can see there, a number of baffles, our end cap screws on the end like so, and then that captures the carbon fibre tube and allows us to take the moderator apart if we need to do so for cleaning or something like that. But there we have it. At this end we have the board out section, so our shroud screws onto about there-ish. That's where the shroud comes to, and reflexing the moderator over the shroud, in my opinion at least, just makes the proportions look a little nicer. We're not left with like a super stumpy moderator at the front, and it just allows us to keep some of the stylings of the original moderator. At the back here we have the turn down section for the stainless steel mesh, so that just drops over like so, and then we have our carbon fibre tube with the slots in it so that we can see the mesh when we actually install the carbon fibre tube. Works quite nicely. I'd definitely do it again on another moderator, maybe some slightly different pieces. As I said earlier, I probably am going to be looking for some finer gauge stainless steel mesh so that we sort of get a finer mesh in the back there. With that done, I'll just get you a close up on the back of the shroud there so you can see the cutouts and the stainless steel mesh. We have a hole here for back venting, although the piece is also back vented through the mesh here as well. There we have it. There's the shroud, and then we screw the moderator onto this end, nice and carefully like so. With that done, we can then screw the mod and shroud straight onto the barrel. And then once the shroud's done up nice and tight, there is a small gap between the back of the shroud and the front of the block. So hopefully you can see that there. It's very important on rifles, as you don't want the shroud to be done up tight against the block. But that's about going to do it for this particular video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.